I would like to pay homage to the stories that all of us carry with us. The stories of the original inhabitants of this land. The stories of those who have come here since. And in particular, the stories of those in this room that are very similar to the one I will share with you tonight. March 21st, the first day of spring. More importantly, Nowruz, the first day of the Iranian New Year. The telephone rang, yelling ensued. I knew by now that yelling into the receiver could only mean one thing. It was Iran on the phone. Not my aunt, not my cousin, no, the nation addressed itself to my household. Among the Nowruz traditions that my family had brought with us to Canada, there were many moments I loved, like lighting bonfires and jumping over them, or making the Haft-seen, the table spread containing 7 wishes for the new year set out in colorful symbols. But there was one moment I dreaded. Anita, Afsoon, come talk to your uncle, my father yelled. I was 8 years old and it felt like my relatives could reach through the telephone and squeeze my cheeks a little too hard and far too long. My sister and I dragged ourselves downstairs and into the kitchen. It's your uncle, come say hello. Which uncle? Bia, talk to him. But what do I say? My knowledge of the appropriate Persian niceties one should utter to one's elders was limited. But it was too late. The receiver had already been thrust next to my ear. Allo amu. I tried to hide the sound of defeat in my voice. And then I whispered to my father, do I say salam or Allahu Akbar? Don't you know your uncle is Baha'i? I don't know which uncle it is. So it was, the binary identity of a child transplanted as if a seedling from the land of its birth. We had moved to Canada a few years earlier via Pakistan and settled in a small Canadian town where my family was the object of questions and the subject of conversations. But we were treated with kindness and respect, and the conversations included us. Well, except for the time my mother applied for a job in the French-speaking part of town. C'est pas possible, vous devez parler français, you must speak French, she was told. To which she replied, why they not speak English in Canada? As I grew up, I learned that while exile can be a thief, it can also be a giver of gifts. But the story starts long before that. It begins in Sanandaj, a city nestled in a valley between the Zagros Mountains of northwestern Iran. A city where the caves, glaciers, and rivers played host to summertime picnics and bathing in the hot springs. In those days, Mali's life was filled with joy. She and her husband Feridoun had just returned from an evening of Kurdish dancing. Neither Mali nor her husband were Kurds, but they had been embraced by the locals. Mali had worn a magnificent Kurdish dress made of hundreds of soft yellow silk flowers hand-sewn onto delicate lace, offset with a black bodice that shimmered with gold accents. She loved to watch her husband and the other men dance, each one standing with their arm around the shoulders of the man next to him. Except for the 2 men at the end of the lines, they held a white handkerchief and waved it in elaborate motions with their free hand. Over and over, the rhythmic and steady movements made the hours pass as if they were minutes. Sanandaj was a unique place, steeped in history, rich in art, to live and raise their little girl. At least it was, until the riots began. The riots in which thousands and thousands of Iranians poured into the streets of cities all over Iran. They protested against the Shah, the king. They shouted for political freedoms. They chanted for their loved ones that had been killed in the riot 40 days ago and the one 40 days before that. When thousands of rioters became millions, the Shah picked up a handful of Iranian soil and fled the country. The protesters had been united in their desire for the Shah's departure, but when their goal was achieved, their divisions became apparent. For one thing, it started to seem as if the ulama, the religious clergy, were taking more control than some had expected. Like when Khomeini, the supreme leader of the revolution, decreed that women must not leave the house without wearing a chador, a veil. The timing of the decree was poignant. It was the eve of International Women's Day. And the celebrations that had been planned were transformed into demonstrations. So when Mali and Feridoun listened to the radio that evening with news coming from Tehran, they heard the voices of tens of thousands of women and men chanting freedom, not of the East nor of the West, but of the world. Without the liberation of women, the revolution is meaningless. But it was to be the last day that women walked the streets with their heads uncovered. As the freedoms they had been shouting for seemed to be slipping through their fingers, the specter of war descended upon them, plunging the nation into chaos. In Sanandaj, the Revolutionary Army and the Kurds had clashed. One night at 3 a.m., Mali and Feridoun were torn from their slumber by a loud, frightening noise, the sound of a crash. It was followed by the cries of their little girl. The house was enveloped in a cloud of dust as they ran to her room. They saw a gaping hole in the roof. Something had fallen through and torn up everything in its path. Mali picked up her young daughter. She was unharmed. When the dust settled, they saw amongst the rubble a red cylindrical object about 2 feet high sticking out of the ground with a flat roof. The Revolutionary Army had fired an artillery illumination round. It would light up the night sky so that they could see where their enemies were hiding in the mountains. It was an empty shell now and wouldn't do any more harm. But it was impossible to dislodge from the floor, so when the room was cleaned and repaired, Mali covered it with a white lace tablecloth and put a plant on it. Many months passed, and with it many lives. But new life was on its way as well. Now in Tehran, Mali was again awoken in the night, this time by the pain in her own body. She put her hand on her protruding belly and prayed for a long labor. For the city was at war and there was a curfew. If the baby came before daybreak, there was no going to the hospital. She would be kept company only by the black curtains on the windows, the candles on the table, and a husband who, given the choice of a career between medicine and engineering, had clearly chosen the wrong profession. Her prayers were answered, and the baby was born with the brilliant sun shining upon her. 2 days later, Mali was at home from the hospital. She held her baby with one arm and the telephone with the other. "Can you hear me?" she asked. "I am so glad the prison is finally letting you speak, but I can barely hear you." It was her eldest brother, Nasser, on the line. He had been in prison for 4 months, sharing a small cell with his 6 friends, together the male members of the local Baha'i assembly of the city of Hamadan. Yes, I can hear you, he replied. Khahara Azizam, I have heard that you have given birth to a little girl. Please tell me she has inherited her uncle's charm and not his big nose. Mali grinned. Even in prison, he can still make me laugh, she thought. Feridun and I have not yet named her. There are 2 names that we like, and I want you to choose which it will be. Azadeh or Afsoon? She asked her brother. Afsoon is very beautiful, Nasser replied. And then after a pause, he added, and if they never let me out of this prison, I don't want you to remember that every time you call her name. For in Farsi, Azadeh means the one who is free. But Mali had only heard one thing. Then it's decided. Little Afsoon it is, my mother said as she looked down at me. As soon as the weather is better, I will bring her to the prison so you can inspect her nose for yourself. You know, my uncle replied, you won't be the only one who's coming in for an examination. Since the prison has allowed my friends and I to have visitors, some of my patients have come to see me. They said they would rather come to prison than find a new doctor. 7 months later, all of my uncle's patients went to see him, but they went to the cemetery. Without warning, the 7 prisoners had been executed. My uncle's limbs were a testament to his courage, for they told the story of the torture that he and his friends had suffered in an effort to make them recant their faith. My family chanted the Baha'i prayer for the dead, and thousands of their Muslim brothers and sisters joined in. The years that followed were tumultuous. Morality police sprung up everywhere. My parents were dismissed from their government jobs on account of their membership in the deviant sect of the Baha'i. So my father started his own business, but his success made him an even larger target. There were many close calls, and as a result, the day came that my parents felt we had no choice. We would try to escape our homeland. It began with a small plane to Zahedan, the city bordering Pakistan. We dressed as if we were taking a holiday and carried 2 small bags. In the afternoon, 2 guides came. The older one said, "We will walk to the outskirts of the city. A truck will meet us there and it will drive you to Pakistan." So we started walking. After an hour, my father asked, "When is the truck coming? The children can't walk much longer." "Soon, soon," came the reply. It was Ramadan, the month of fasting for these Baluchis who were capitalizing on their knowledge of the rugged landscape to engage in a new trade. We continued walking. I was huddled on my father's shoulders, clinging to his neck. Dusk arrived. It is cold at night in the desert. The guides broke their fast. "Where is the food you promised us and the clothes?" They gave us 2 packets of biscuits. Into the darkness, we continued walking. We were covered in dust. Our mouths were dry. There was a small pool of muddy liquid a few feet away. My mother prayed as she lifted the water to my lips. Before the rays of sunlight rose, the guides pointed. "There, that is Pakistan. When I say, you must run." Before us was a dirt road barely distinguishable from the rest of the landscape. "Do it now! Run!" My parents sprinted, muscles tensed, sweating. But then, 10 seconds later, lie down, lie down. There was an army patrol tank. The guides hadn't seen it. It was behind a small hill, and now as it rose to the top, its headlights brightened the darkness. We hit the ground. But the guides realized that as soon as it started coming down, they would see us and fire upon sight. Get up, run, hurry! The road that the tank traveled on was curved, veering to the right. So as it descended the hill, its headlights chased us as we ran across the road. By the grace of God, the stream of light never caught up with us. On Pakistani soil, we threw ourselves down. The truck rolled by. We lay with our faces to the ground, half alive, but free. There are many tales to tell from that day until this one, but I will share one with you. Last year, I met one of my cousins for the first time in my life. While we were talking, he said to me, "Afsoon, when I look at you and my children, I am saddened. You do not know the sweetness of growing up in the company of many cousins, aunts, and uncles, all living in the place where our family has roots going back to ancient Persia. Instead, a storm came and scattered us in the wind." I reflected for a while, and then I said, "That is true. And it is also true that when we were scattered, we were seeds, and we have planted new roots. Our family tree is very special because it has leaves of many colors. These days, the phone rings at Nowruz, but it also rings at Christmas and Hanukkah. And it is not only Iran calling, but Switzerland and Paraguay and Australia. We have lost our country, but we have gained the world.